Straight ahead on Law&Crime Daily. The terrifying moment as a driver rams into a mother and her baby girl. The heroic bystanders and officers lifting the vehicle off the infant.
Grab the baby. Grab the baby.
How one woman's ingenuity on a dating app led the FBI to a Capitol riot suspect accused of pepper spraying and beating officers with a whip. And police identifying the suspected rapist and killer of a 14-year-old girl. The cold case solved thanks to the help of donations from an unexpected source.
Sometimes it's just the little things that you can do that, make a difference.
Plus, horrific details as a jury learns how college student Samantha Josephson was murdered after getting into the wrong car, thinking it was her Uber ride.
This is the weapon.
Law&Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law&Crime Daily. I'm Brian Buckmeyer along with Terry Austin. Two police officers in Yonkers, New York helped bystanders lift a car off of a baby, and it's all caught on camera. And Jeanette Levy is here with a video of the dramatic rescue.
Brian, these officers were just getting breakfast in a bagel shop when they heard that loud crash, and they sprang into action to investigate.
Last Friday, it was a sunny morning in Yonkers when a 36-year-old woman started to cross the street with her 8-month-old daughter. Then Yonkers police say a suspected drunk driver came out of nowhere, striking a car and plowing the mother and baby into a shop.
4-3 headquarters expedite. We got a baby under the vehicle.
Body camera video from Officer Paul Samayedny shows people trying to lift the car off of the baby.
Somebody's got to pull the baby. Just got to pull him out.
The scene chaotic as the officers and witnesses work to rescue the infant.
Okay, grab the baby. Grab the baby. Come on. I got it. I got the baby. I got the baby. Hold up. Okay. Yes. Okay.
Officer Rocco Fusco's body camera showed a different view of the rescue.
Grab the baby. Grab the baby. Come on. I got it.
Now, that baby suffered a skull fracture and third-degree burns. Her mother suffered a fracture to her leg, and they are both thankfully expected to survive. That driver who hit them, his name is David Ponkurak, and he faces several charges, including driving while intoxicated. Brian?
Thanks, Anjanette. Joining us today is criminal defense attorney Mike Correspondent and Terry Austin. Mike, vehicular assault and driving while intoxicated. How bad are these charges? What kind of time is this guy looking at?
These are bad charges. He's got a maximum of 15 years he's looking at, but it's going to be interesting to see what his blood alcohol level was and things of that nature. But it appears there's going to be a lot of aggravating factors to this case because of the nature of it. And I mean, this is midday. It looks, daylight. I shouldn't say midday. I don't know exactly the time, but it's just very scary.
Yeah, if the timestamp on the video is correct, it's 8:29 a.m. So being intoxicated that early is definitely something the prosecution is going to look very poorly on, and of course, the nature of the victims. And Jeanette, what evidence do the police have to support the driving while intoxicated charge?
Well, Brian, the Yonkers police said on its Facebook page that they found an alcoholic beverage inside the vehicle. So not only are they saying that he was intoxicated, but that they found an actual alcoholic drink in the car, which is really bad news. And they also did a blood alcohol test. We don't know the results of that yet, but we have to assume that the police have a good idea of what that might be. And sometimes those tests, depending on when they're run, can take a few weeks.
Yeah, and the blood alcohol content of the state of New York, the legal limit is 0.08, as much, or many states in this country. So if he's above that, that's where you're going to see that DWI charge that comes up in his charging documents. Thank you, everyone. Turning now to other top legal news, Colorado prosecutors now say a husband accused of murdering his wife used a spy pen to secretly record her. Susan Morphew was reported missing by her neighbor on Mother's Day 2020. Her husband, Barry Morphew, pleaded for her safe return on social media, but a year later was charged with killing her. His arrest warrant remains sealed for now, but at a recent hearing, prosecutors revealed there's a rough audio from a spy pen in which Susan can be heard talking to a man on the phone. Morphew is being held in jail without bail. A grand jury has indicted a man accused of murdering 3 people and leaving their bodies on a Georgia golf course. Brian Rowland is now facing 15 charges, including malice murder, felony murder, and aggravated assault. According to the indictment, Rowland kidnapped 2 of the victims, gagging them and binding their hands with duct tape before throwing them into the bed of a pickup truck. Prosecutors say Rowland drove onto the Pine Tree Golf Course, shot the man, then shot golf pro Gene Siller, who happened upon the scene. Rowland is due back in court later this week. R&B singer R. Kelly is facing serious allegations ahead of the anticipated start of his New York trial. Prosecutors in Brooklyn are accusing Kelly of sexually abusing a 17-year-old boy nearly 15 years ago. According to newly filed court documents, Kelly invited the boy to his Chicago recording studio under the guise of mentoring him, then engaged in sexual contact with him. Prosecutors are asking a judge to allow evidence from the alleged assault in at trial as an uncharged act. R. Kelly's trial is scheduled to begin in August. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, the surprising donation police say helped crack a decades-old cold case of a teenage girl found raped and murdered. But first, the latest Capitol riot arrest, how a dating app helped catch a suspect accused of assaulting officers, and the woman the FBI is now thanking after the break. Welcome back. Federal prosecutors are crediting the help of a woman on a dating app to help catch a suspect accused of beating officers with a whip during the January 6th Capitol insurrection. According to court records, the woman tipped off the FBI that Andrew Take messaged her on the app Bumble, sending her a picture of himself after being sprayed by officers. Investigators say they then matched Take up to a suspect wanted for pepper spraying police in front of a bike rack barricade. The agent goes on to say that less than an hour later, Take used a metal whip to beat more officers. Surveillance video also allegedly shows Take inside the building with other rioters. Take was arrested on Friday for charges of obstruction, assault, and disorderly conduct. Back with us to discuss the man who probably wishes he swiped left is criminal defense attorney Mike Correspondent and Terry Austin. Terry, dating apps provide GPS, so with that and the photos, does this sound like an airtight case for the prosecution?
You know, it's pretty airtight, Brian. What they want to do is corroborate all of the information together, both the circumstantial and the direct. The direct evidence being, the factual evidence, and the, circumstantial evidence being the inferences that they can make. And so what they're going to want to do is take video. They want to use the photos. They want to use witnesses. They want to use everything from the app and put that all together just to make sure they can put everyone together in one place and really point the finger to make this a very airtight case.
Now, Mike, I'll let your son explain dating apps to you later, but these dating app messages, can they be used against the defendant in court?
Absolutely, but I was on the phone with my son, I'm sorry. No, yeah, absolutely in court. I mean, people have to realize that prosecutors now use cell phones as like just an endless supply of evidence. People could be told what time and place they're at, and those are not confidential or protected statements you make on dating apps, anything that's open to the public. So this is another case, and we talk about it often, Brian, how when defendants go out and brag about what they do, it's the best evidence the prosecution has against them.
Hey, I found love on a dating app. It seems like this person's going to find a different type of love with the criminal justice system. So we'll see how this continues for this defendant, as Bumble seems to have stung him in more ways than one. Turning now to Las Vegas, where a 32-year-old cold case is solved thanks to a generous donation and DNA testing. Anjanette Levy is back and has more on the man who paid for the testing. Anjanette?
Brian, Las Vegas Metro Police say they now know who killed Stephanie Isaacson back in 1989. And interestingly enough, a donation from a restaurant owner helped crack the case.
For decades, Stephanie Isaacson's family and detectives have wanted to know who took her life. She left her home for school on June 1st, 1989, and never made it.
At autopsy, we learned that Stephanie had significant blunt force trauma injuries and that she had been sexually assaulted. The Clark County Coroner's Office ruled her death as a result of strangulation.
But thanks to a company called Othram, they now know.
We have identified Darren Roy Marchand, who has been positively identified as the person who sexually assaulted and murdered Stephanie.
Othram conducted DNA testing, identifying Marchand through genetic genealogy with an incredibly small amount of DNA.
In January of 2021, the forensic lab, in conjunction with our cold case homicide team, submitted the remaining evidence that we had, which had very little DNA left. The equivalent of 15 cells was submitted for this testing.
Justin Wu's generous donation helped crack the case.
In many ways, I'm glad that we were able to, that it was successful in finding someone and matching the murderer to the case.
Wu said the owner of Othram approached him about sponsoring a case, the restaurateur, now a bit of a crime fighter.
It's weird, and sometimes it's just the little things that you can do that, make a difference.
While police know who killed Stephanie, sadly, Marchand will never be held accountable. He died by suicide in 1995. Police read a statement from the young girl's mother.
I'm glad they found who murdered my daughter. I never believed the case would be solved. It's good to have some closure, but there is no justice for Stephanie at all.
Now, police say that Darren Marchand had actually been arrested for another murder 3 years before Stephanie was killed. That murder charge was actually dropped for a lack of evidence, and Las Vegas police had conducted DNA testing several times over the years, but they didn't get that match until they went the route of genetic genealogy earlier this year. Brian?
Thanks, Anjanette, and of course to the compassionate donation of that restaurateur. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, the fake Uber murder trial. Will the defendant accused of murdering a young woman in the back of his seat of his car take the stand in his own defense? Find out next. Welcome back. We head to South Carolina, where both sides have rested without the defendant taking the stand in the trial of a man accused of murdering a college student who allegedly got into his car thinking it was her Uber ride. 27-year-old Nathaniel Rowland is charged with kidnapping and murdering 21-year-old Samantha Josephson. Josephson was last seen on surveillance video around 2 a.m. in March 2019, leaving a bar and getting into a black vehicle. According to the autopsy, Josephson suffered more than 120 stab wounds and cuts to much of her body. On the stand, the forensic pathologist identified a multi-tool knife with 2 blades that belonged to the defendant as the murder weapon.
The parallel cuts are made by this.
Did you see some singular stab wounds as well?
Yes, and many, in fact, the majority of the stab wounds were singular stab wounds. Once this is pulled apart, like this, now it's a single-bladed weapon. So that's one of the things that was confusing me at the autopsy was I thought there must be 2 weapons because there was the parallel blade ones and then there were the single ones. So I thought it's unusual to have 2 weapons. But now I think it's explained to my satisfaction that this is the knife in this conformation would make the parallel wounds that I saw, and then if it's in this conformation, it could then make the single stab wounds.
The forensic pathologist then gave his opinion on what caused Samantha Josephson's death.
She's going to bleed out.
She's going to bleed out, you said?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And one of the neck wounds involves the carotid artery and the jugular vein. That wound would produce a lot of blood flow. She had a defect in her hyoid bone on the right side. In her case, though, I'm not of the opinion that it's a strangulation. I think it came from one of the stab wounds to her neck. The knife actually got up high enough to sever the hyoid bone. I couldn't tell you absolutely there was no manual strangulation involved, but I can tell you I would favor that it was done by a knife, by the stab wound.
Do you have an opinion right now that you can tell this jury of what caused Samantha Josephson's death?
Yes, multiple stab wounds. I made the cause of death multiple stab wounds.
When we come back, cross-examination. How will the forensic pathologist hold up when questioned by the defense? And the key piece of evidence the defense says is missing next. Back now to the South Carolina murder trial of Nathaniel Rowland. An expert has said the victim's DNA was found under his fingernails, but that his DNA was not found under hers. Defense attorneys wanted to know more about the victim's fingernail clippings taken at autopsy.
In your report, you indicated that they were medium length at the time.
Okay.
Today, you're telling us that you thought they were fairly short in length.
Well, they're not long, let's put it that way. So I was in the idea of getting DNA under your fingernails. Long fingernails will be more effective in getting some kind of DNA under your fingernails than short ones. So hers are medium length, so probably a little bit longer than mine.
But you were able to notice with the nails that she had evidence of tearing. That's what you put in your report.
Correct, yes.
Then the defense asked the medical examiner how he could be so certain that multi-tool was in fact the murder weapon.
I had not seen the weapon before it was presented to me today, so I did not know that it opened up until I saw it this morning.
But you've been told, you had a conversation with the prosecutors in preparation for trial where you did a discussion about this multi-tool was had, right?
Yes, that was like a few days ago.
Mm-hmm. And during that conversation, you would say that some of the wounds are consistent with being made by the multi-tool in the open position and some in the closed position.
Correct.
You didn't get a picture of the weapon at that time?
No, and in fact, I sent law enforcement a picture that I thought might be the weapon just from my search of thousands and thousands of images of knives, and but it turned out to be something entirely different.
Interesting.
On redirect by the prosecution, the medical examiner explained how some of the victim's stab wounds could be longer than the length of the blade.
The hilt of the knife, the handle, pushes in on the soft tissue and allows the blade to go deeper into the soft tissues. So it's fairly common to see wounds deeper than the length of the blade, particularly on the abdomen and on the chest area, but also on the thigh where there's a lot of soft tissue that can be compressed by the hilt of the handle of the knife.
And you saw that in this case?
I did not see that hilt or handle mark, which is sometimes good for us to see, excuse me. But that's what I measured it. When I put the probe in and I pulled it out and I put it against the ruler, that's what the length was.
How long would it take a person to die from these wounds?
The injuries to the brain and the carotid artery are fairly severe and the bleeding would be profuse and very rapid. So I would say a matter of minutes, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, maybe 20.
Now, Mike, the DNA under or not under certain fingernails, depending on who you're looking at, it makes me think maybe, it's just a theory I'm throwing out there, Rowland was there but didn't kill Josephson, that she fought and scratched the person who stabbed her, but maybe it's not him. What do you think? Can the defense work with any of this?
They could work with it, but I don't think it's going to carry the day. I think it's an easy explanation that, there's no evidence or no evidence was presented of any scratching or anything like that on the defendant. You would think you'd see something like that if you wanted to bring it to some sort of relevance. There was none. I think it may be like a red herring type of thing, Brian, because it could be very well he was wearing long sleeve shirts while she was fighting back, or a sweatshirt, and she didn't get to his skin.
Yeah. But to that point then, should there be, I don't know, some fabric under her fingernails? Like if you scratch at my suit, I would think that my suit has my DNA on it. You might get some of my DNA or even some parts of my suit. Could that be another route the defense goes?
It could be, but it just seems that the pileup of evidence and the way these circumstances get better and better for the prosecution with each witness, I don't think it would really be a game-changing type of point to bring out.
Agreed. Now, Terry, this case went by pretty quickly. And the interesting part is both sides have rested, but the defense never put on a case. The defendant didn't testify, understand that's his right, but no evidence, no witnesses, no nothing to kind of feed us this information that they put on in the opening statement that he was passed out somewhere. So how is this going to work out for the defense?
I think so far the defense has made very little headway. And if they aren't putting on a case, which they are not, they did not make any headway with any of the cross-examinations. So they basically repeated what the prosecution said on most of the direct examinations. So for instance, as it related to the weapon, she just repeated, well, did you know what kind of weapon it was? And did you talk to the prosecution about the weapon? And he said he did. But she tried to make it seem like there was a problem with having that discussion. There was no problem with that discussion. And Dr. Baker was very clear. Whatever weapon killed our victim here, no question that it was two-sided, parallel blades, and then one-sided. So this weapon fit the exact evidence that we have on Samantha's body. So I don't think that the defense made headway with the cross-examinations of the main witnesses, and they certainly haven't made any headway because they've rested and they aren't bringing on any witnesses. They have no explanation.
So as we all know, Terry, the defense can only argue what came in at trial, what came in through direct or cross-examination or through their witnesses, none here. So what can the defense argue at the summation of this trial?
They can't argue very much. Brian, you and I were talking about this. They brought up some information during their opening that maybe the defendant was asleep and someone else used his car, but they've not put on any information to that effect. And they cannot argue that at summation. So I don't know what they're going to say. It's going to be very interesting to hear what arguments they are going to make because every single bit of evidence goes against the defendant here.
All right, trial or dismissal has happened. The judge denied that. We'll see how this continues with closing statements next. Thank you both for joining us, and thank you for joining us here at Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.